Hey there, everyone. Get ready, because I'm about to tell you a super cool story that's going to grab your attention and keep you hooked. Imagine this, I'm just a regular kid named Jake. I live in a small house, not too big, not too fancy, just right for me. And the best part? I've got this awesome little garden outside. It's my favorite thing ever. I work so hard on it, planting every single flower and every tiny blade of grass with my own hands. I watered it, I talked to it, I loved it like it was my baby. Every time I looked at those bright colors, red roses, yellow daisies, purple tulips, I felt so proud. It was my special place, my happy spot. But here's the secret twist no one saw coming, not my friends, not my family, not even me at first. My neighbor, Karen, was cooking up a sneaky plan. She lived right next door, and she thought I was just some silly guy who wouldn't notice anything. She thought I was a pushover, someone she could trick super easy. Ha! Boy, was she in for a big surprise. Karen didn't know it yet, but she was about to mess with the wrong gardener. Oh yeah, this story's gonna get wild, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. Before we jump in, I've got a fun little thing for you to do. Picture yourself sitting there, watching this story unfold. I want to know, have you ever had a neighbor who acted all bossy or entitled? You know, someone who thinks they're better than everyone else? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from today. Are you at home? At school? Maybe outside in your own garden? Oh, and one more thing, if you like stories about sneaky people getting what they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got tons more fun tales like this one, and I don't want you to miss any of them. Okay, let's get back to the story, it's about to start for real. So, it all began on a sunny afternoon. The sky was blue, the birds were chirping, and the sun was shining bright. I was out in my garden, like I usually am, holding my green watering can. I tipped it over, letting the water splash onto my flowers. They sparkled in the sunlight, and I smiled big. Everything felt perfect. But then, something weird caught my eye. I stopped watering and scratched my head. I'd just gotten my water bill in the mail that morning, and when I opened it, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. It was huge, like, way bigger than it should have been. Normally, my water bill is pretty small. I don't use a lot of water, just enough for my garden and stuff like taking a shower or washing dishes. But this time, it was crazy high, like someone had been using tons and tons of water at my house. I stood there, staring at the paper, thinking, huh? What's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. I checked the numbers again, yep, they were real. My garden didn't need that much water. I didn't take super long showers or leave the sink running. So why was my bill so big? It was a mystery, and I was confused. Little did I know, the answer was right next door. Yep, you guessed it, Karen was up to something sneaky. She wasn't just my neighbor, she was about to become the villain in my story. See, Karen wasn't like most people. She didn't just say hi and wave like a normal neighbor. Oh no, she was different. She acted like she was the boss of everyone, like the whole street belonged to her. She'd walk around with her nose in the air, telling people what to do, acting all high and mighty. And me? She thought I was just some quiet guy who wouldn't fight back. She thought she could do whatever she wanted, and I'd never figure it out. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. Let me tell you a little more about my garden first, because it's super important to the story. It wasn't just a bunch of plants to me, it was my hard work, my happy place. I'd spent months making it perfect. Every morning, I'd wake up early just to check on it. I'd pull out any weeds that dared to pop up. I'd sprinkle water on the flowers and watch them grow taller every day. I even named some of them. There was Rosie the rose bush, Daisy the daisy patch, and Little Tulip who sat by the fence. Silly, right? But it made me smile. That garden was my pride and joy, and I'd do anything to keep it safe. So, on that sunny afternoon, I was out there as usual. The flowers were swaying in the breeze, looking so pretty. I had my watering can in one hand and a big grin on my face. Everything seemed normal until I thought about that water bill again. I set the can down and sat on the grass, staring at my house. Something's not right, I mumbled to myself. I started thinking hard. Had I left the hose on by accident? Nope, I always turned it off. Had someone else been using my water? But who would do that? I didn't have any clues yet, but I was starting to feel a little suspicious. That's when I remembered Karen. She'd been acting extra weird lately. Like, weirder than usual. She'd walk by my garden sometimes and make little comments. "Oh, Jake, your flowers are so messy," she'd say with a fake smile. Or, "You use too much water on that silly thing." I'd just laugh and say, "Thanks, Karen," because I didn't want to start a fight. But now, thinking back, those words stuck in my head. Why did she care how much water I used? It was my garden, my house, my water. What was she up to? I decided to keep my eyes open. I didn't know it yet, but Karen had a secret, a big one. She thought she was so smart, sneaking around behind my back. She thought I'd never catch on. But I'm not as dumb as she thought. I'm Jake, the garden guy, and I was about to figure out her game. That water bill? It was the first hint, the first piece of the puzzle. And soon, I'd find more clues that would blow this whole thing wide open. Let's rewind a bit, because I want you to really picture this with me. My house is small, just one floor with a red front door and a little porch. The garden sits right in front, tucked between my house and Karen's. Her house is bigger, with a fancy white fence and a lawn that's always super green, too green, if you ask me. She's got this big sprinkler system that shoots water everywhere, and she's always bragging about how perfect her yard looks. "My lawn is the best on the street," she'd say, flipping her hair. I'd just nod and go back to my flowers, but it annoyed me a little. Okay, a lot. So there I was, that sunny day, watering my garden and wondering about that bill. The more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. I walked around my yard, checking everything. The hose was off. The faucet wasn't leaking. Everything seemed fine. But my gut, that funny feeling in your tummy, it told me something was wrong. And when I glanced over at Karen's house, I saw her outside, watering her lawn with that big sprinkler. She waved at me with a sneaky grin, like she knew something I didn't. That's when it hit me, maybe this wasn't just about my bill. Maybe Karen had something to do with it. I didn't have proof yet, but I was starting to wonder. Could she really be sneaky enough to mess with my water? It sounded crazy, but I couldn't shake the idea. I decided right then and there to pay closer attention. I wasn't going to let this mystery slip by me. My garden was too important, and so was my money. I finished watering that day and went inside, but my brain was buzzing. I had a feeling things were about to get interesting, really interesting. And that's where our story starts, friends. This is just the beginning. Karen thought she could outsmart me, but she didn't know what was coming. That water bill was the first clue, and soon, I'd find more. Stick with me, because this tale is about to take some wild turns. What do you think so far? Are you Team Jake yet? Let me know in the comments, and get ready because Karen's about to show her true colors, and I'm about to show her mine. Okay, friends, let's keep this story rolling. So now you know me, I'm Jake, the guy with the awesome garden. But here's where things start to heat up, because my neighbor Karen? Oh boy, she was something else. She lived right next door to me, and let me tell you, she acted like she was the queen of the whole street. Not just my street, every street. She walked around like she owned every house, every tree, every speck of dirt. And trust me, she loved telling everyone what to do. Karen wasn't the kind of neighbor who'd wave and say, "Hi, Jake, nice day." Nope. She was the kind who'd boss you around like she was in charge of the world. She'd stomp over to my yard with her arms crossed and her nose all scrunched up. "Jake," she'd snap in her loud, bossy voice, "your flowers are so ugly. They look like a mess." I'd look at my pretty roses and daisies, all bright and happy, and think, ugly? Really? But I didn't say that out loud. I'd just nod and smile, trying to keep things calm. "Okay, Karen," I'd say, even though inside, I was starting to get mad. And that wasn't all. She'd find other stuff to complain about too. One time, she marched over and pointed at my trash cans. They were sitting by my house, right where they're supposed to be. But Karen? She didn't like that. "Jake," she said, all huffy, Your trash cans are too close to my driveway. Move them. Her driveway was super fancy to her, I guess, like it was made of gold or something. I looked at my cans, they weren't even touching her precious driveway. But again, I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, "Sure, Karen," and moved them a tiny bit. Inside, though, I was steaming like a pot of hot soup. I didn't like how she talked to me, but I kept quiet, for now. Oh, and here's the big one: she hated my garden. Hated it? Every time I watered my flowers, she'd have something mean to say. "Jake," she'd yell over the fence, "you need to stop wasting water on that silly garden." Wasting water? Silly garden? My flowers weren't silly, they were awesome. I'd spent months growing them, picking out the best seeds, planting them just right. I'd water them carefully, making sure they got just what they needed. But to Karen, it was all a big waste. She'd roll her eyes and shake her head like I was doing something dumb. I'd bite my tongue, nod again, and say, "Okay, Karen," even though I wanted to shout, "Leave my garden alone." Now, you might be wondering why I didn't just tell her off. Well, I'm a pretty chill guy. I don't like fights, and I didn't want trouble with my neighbor. Plus, I figured she'd get bored of bossing me around eventually. But oh no, Karen didn't stop. She kept going, day after day, with her snappy words and grumpy looks. It was like she enjoyed making me mad. And little by little, all those mean comments were piling up in my head. It was like stacking firewood piece by piece, getting higher and higher. All it needed was a spark, something to set it off. I didn't know what that spark would be yet, but I could feel it coming. Then one day, something happened that made my eyebrows shoot up. I was outside, just looking at my garden, when I saw Karen across the fence. She was watering her lawn, her big, fancy lawn that was always so green. Like, too green, you know? It was the kind of green that looks fake, like a cartoon. She had this big sprinkler going, shooting water all over the place. And there she was, standing with her hands on her hips, smirking at me. Smirking. Like she had a secret she wasn't telling. I waved at her, trying to be nice, but she just gave me the sneaky little grin and turned away. That's when my gut, that funny feeling in your tummy, started talking to me. It said, "Jake, something's not right here." I looked at her lawn again. It was so perfect, so green, but I never saw Karen working on it. She didn't dig in the dirt like I did. She didn't plant seeds or pull weeds. She barely even went outside except to yell at me. So how was her lawn so amazing? It didn't add up. My garden was pretty because I worked hard, but Karen? She didn't lift a finger. Something was fishy, and I was starting to wonder what she was hiding. I thought back to all the stuff she'd said. "Stop wasting water," she'd snap. "Your garden's silly," she'd grumble. Why did she care so much about my water? It was mine, not hers. I paid for it with my own money. But every time she said it, she'd get that look like she knew something I didn't. And now, seeing her smirk while she watered her perfect lawn, I started connecting the dots. Maybe this wasn't just about her being bossy. Maybe there was more to it. My brain was buzzing, and my tummy was twisting. I didn't have proof yet, but I was getting suspicious. Karen loved acting like she was better than me. She'd strut around the street, yep, strut, like a peacock showing off its feathers. She'd talk loud so everyone could hear, saying stuff like, "My lawn is the best," or "I keep the street looking good." The other neighbors would nod and smile, but I could tell some of them were annoyed too. She'd walk past my house, glance at my garden, and make a face like it smelled bad. Then she'd keep going, head held high, like she was the queen and I was just some kid with a messy yard. It drove me nuts, but I stayed quiet, for now. Every time she said something mean, it added to that pile in my head. Every snarky comment, every eye roll, every bossy order, it was like throwing more wood on the stack. I'd hear her voice, "Ugly flowers. Too much water. Move your trash." And I'd feel my hands curl into fists. Not because I wanted to hit her, I'd never do that, but because I was so frustrated. I'd take a deep breath, let it out, and keep smiling. But inside? Oh, inside I was steaming hotter than a summer day. That firewood pile was getting tall, and I knew it wouldn't take much to light it up. Let me paint you a picture of Karen, so you can see her in your head. She was tall, with short blonde hair that she flipped all the time. She always wore bright clothes, like red shirts or yellow dresses, so everyone would notice her. Her house was big and white, with a perfect little fence around it. Her lawn stretched out in front, green as a lime, with not a single weed anywhere. She'd stand out there sometimes, just staring at it, like it was a prize she'd won. And me? I was the guy next door with the small house, the red door, and the garden she couldn't stand. I started watching her more after that smirky day. I'd peek out my window or sit on my porch, keeping an eye on her. She didn't know I was watching, but I was. I'd see her turn on that sprinkler, water blasting everywhere, and I'd think, how does she do it? Her lawn was green even when it hadn't rained in weeks. My garden needed water every day to stay pretty, but hers? It was like magic. And every time I saw that smirk, my gut twisted a little more. Something was up, I could feel it in my bones. The more I thought about it, the madder I got. All those times she'd snapped at me, all those mean looks, it wasn't just her being grumpy. It was like she was trying to hide something. My garden was my happy place, but to Karen, it was a problem. Why? I didn't know yet, but I was starting to guess. Maybe she didn't like me because I wasn't like her. I didn't strut or brag. I just took care of my flowers and minded my own business. But Karen? She wanted everyone to look at her, to think she was the best. And maybe, just maybe, she was doing something sneaky to make sure she stayed on top. That pile of firewood in my head? It was huge now. Every mean word she said was another log. Every smirk was a stick. Every bossy order was a twig. I'd kept the peace for a long time, smiling and nodding, but I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I wasn't ready to explode yet, but I was close. All I needed was one little spark, something to prove she was up to no good. And when I found it, oh boy, Karen was in for a big surprise. So there I was, stuck between mad and curious. Karen strutted around like she owned the world, and I stayed quiet, watching and waiting. Her lawn was too green, her smirk was too sneaky, and her words were too mean. My gut kept whispering, she's hiding something, Jake. Figure it out. I didn't have the answer yet, but I was getting closer. The tension was building, like a balloon filling up with air. Sooner or later, it was going to pop, and when it did, this story was going to get really exciting. What do you think, friends? Was Karen just being mean, or was she up to something big? Stick with me, because the next part's coming, and it's going to blow your mind. Alright, friends, let's keep this story moving. We're diving deeper into the mess with Karen, my bossy neighbor, and trust me, it's about to get even juicier. So, like I said, Karen lived right next door, and she wasn't just any neighbor, she acted like she was the queen of everything. She thought she could boss everyone around, and I was her favorite target. Picture her standing there, hands on her hips, giving me that mean look like I didn't belong on her street. Oh yeah, she loved picking on me, and it was starting to pile up in my head like a big stack of trouble. Karen was always finding something to complain about. One day, it was my garden. Jake, she'd snap, her voice sharp like a barking dog, those flowers are so ugly. They make the whole street look bad. I'd look at my flowers, my happy little roses and sunny daisies, and wonder what she was talking about. Ugly. They were beautiful to me. But I didn't argue. I'd just smile and say, okay, Karen, even though my tummy was twisting with annoyance. I didn't want to fight, so I kept it cool. But inside, I was starting to bubble like a pot of water on the stove. Then there was the trash can thing. Oh boy, she loved that one. My trash cans were by my house, right where they're supposed to be. But Karen? She'd march over, point at them, and say, Jake, your cans are too close to my driveway. Move them right now. Her driveway wasn't even close, they were like 5 steps away. I'd scratch my head and think, really, Karen? But I'd nod, say, sure, Karen, and slide them over a tiny bit. She'd huff and walk away, happy she'd won. Me. I was steaming inside, but I didn't let her see it. Not yet. And don't get me started on her water comments. Every time I watered my garden, she'd poke her head over the fence and grumble, Jake, you need to stop wasting water on that silly garden. Wasting water? Silly. My garden was my pride and joy. I'd spent hours planting those flowers, watching them grow, making them perfect. I'd sprinkle just enough water to keep them happy, not too much, not too little. But Karen acted like I was pouring buckets down the drain. Okay, Karen, I'd say with a fake smile, pretending it didn't bug me. But oh, it did. It bugged me a lot. See, Karen wasn't just bossy, she was sneaky about it too. She'd say these things with a little smirk, like she was laughing at me in her head. She'd strut around the street, her fancy shoes clicking on the sidewalk, acting like she was better than everyone. My house is the prettiest, she'd brag to the other neighbors. My lawn is the greenest. They'd nod and smile, but I could tell some of them were tired of her too. She'd glance at my garden as she walked by, wrinkle her nose like it smelled bad, and keep going. Every time she did that, I felt a little spark inside me, like a tiny fire starting to glow. Then came the day that really got me thinking. I was outside, just chilling by my flowers, when I saw Karen watering her lawn. Her lawn was huge, and it was so green, like the greenest green you've ever seen. It looked like a picture from a magazine, all perfect and shiny. She had this big sprinkler going, spraying water all over, and there she was, standing with that sneaky smirk again. She caught me looking and waved, but it wasn't a nice wave. It was a "ha-ha, I'm better than you" wave. I waved back, trying to be polite, but my gut, that funny feeling in your tummy, started talking loud. Jake, my gut said, something's wrong here. I stared at her lawn. It was too perfect. I mean, I worked hard on my garden every day, digging, planting, watering, and it looked great. But Karen? She didn't do any of that. I never saw her with a shovel or a watering can. She didn't even mow her grass. So how was her lawn so green? It didn't make sense. My garden needed love and care to stay pretty, but hers looked amazing without her doing a thing. That smirk, that wave, it was like she knew something I didn't. And I didn't like it one bit. I started replaying all her mean words in my head. Stop wasting water, she'd say. Your flowers are ugly, she'd snap. Move your trash, she'd bark. Why was she always on my case? Why did she care so much about my water? It was my house, my bill, my garden, not hers. But every time she said it, she had that look like she was hiding a secret. And now, watching her water that perfect lawn with that sneaky grin, I started to wonder. Was she just being mean, or was there more going on? My brain was spinning, and my gut was yelling, pay attention, Jake. Karen loved acting like she was the boss of me. She'd strut past my house every day, yep, strut, like she was in a parade. Her head was high, her shoulders back, like she was saying, look at me, I'm the best. She'd talk loud so everyone could hear. My lawn is perfect, she'd shout. I make the street look good. The neighbors would smile and nod, but I saw a few roll their eyes when she wasn't looking. She'd glance at my garden, make a face like it was garbage, and keep walking. It made me so mad, but I didn't say a word. I just watched, and waited. All those snarky comments? They were stacking up fast. Every time she opened her mouth, it was like throwing another log on a big pile of firewood. Ugly flowers. Log. Too much water. Log. Move your cans. Log. Then she'd roll her eyes at me, another stick on the pile. Or smirk like she was so smart, another twig. I'd stand there, smiling on the outside, but inside, I was hotter than a summer day. That pile was getting tall, and I could feel it, something was going to happen soon. All it needed was a spark, and I'd be ready. Let me tell you more about Karen, so you can see her clear as day. She was tall, with short blonde hair she flipped all the time, like she was in a movie. She wore bright clothes, red shirts, yellow dresses, stuff that screamed, look at me. Her house was big and white, with a little fence that shone in the sun. Her lawn was huge, stretching out like a green carpet, not a weed in sight. She'd stand there sometimes, just staring at it, smirking like she'd won a prize. And me? I was the guy next door with my small house, my red door, and my garden she loved to hate. I started keeping a closer eye on her after that smirky day. I'd sit on my porch with a glass of lemonade, pretending to relax, but really, I was watching. I'd see her turn on that sprinkler, water flying everywhere, and I'd think, how? Her lawn stayed green even when it was hot and dry for weeks. My garden needed water every day to survive, but hers. It was like it never needed a drop except it did, because there she was, watering it. That smirk kept popping up, and every time I saw it, my tummy twisted tighter. Something was fishy, and I was going to figure it out. The more I watched, the madder I got. All those times she'd snapped at me, all those mean faces, it wasn't just her being grumpy. It was like she was playing a game, and I was losing. My garden was my happy spot, my little world, but to Karen, it was something to pick on. Why? I didn't know yet, but I had a guess. Maybe she didn't like me because I wasn't loud like her. I didn't brag or strut. I just loved my flowers and kept to myself. But Karen? She wanted everyone to see her, to think she was the queen. And maybe she was doing something sneaky to stay that way. That fire would pile in my head. It was giant now. Every mean word was a log. Every eye roll was a stick. Every bossy yell was a twig. I'd kept quiet for so long, smiling and nodding, but it was getting harder. I wasn't ready to yell yet, but I was close. All I needed was proof, something to show she was up to no good. And when I found it, watch out, Karen. Things were going to change. So there I was, stuck between mad and curious. Karen strutted around like she ruled the world, and I stayed quiet, watching her every move. Her lawn was too green, her smirk was too sneaky, and her words were too mean. My gut kept saying, she's hiding something, Jake. Dig deeper. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I was getting there. The tension was growing, like a rubber band stretching tight. Soon, it was going to snap, and when it did, this story was going to get wild. What do you think so far, friends? Is Karen just a big bully, or is she hiding a sneaky trick? Hang on tight, because the next part's coming, and it's going to be a doozy. Hey, friends. We're back with more of this crazy story, and it's about to get even better. So, you know me, I'm Jake, the guy with the awesome garden, and Karen, my sneaky neighbor, was starting to drive me nuts. Things were heating up, and I was about to find out stuff that would blow my mind. Ready? Here we go. Days went by after I got that huge water bill, and guess what? It didn't stop. Every week, the bill kept climbing higher and higher, like a rocket shooting up to the sky. At first, I thought maybe I was watering my garden too much. But no way. I was super careful with my flowers, just a little sprinkle here, a little splash there. My roses and daisies didn't need buckets of water to stay happy. So why was my bill so big? It was like a mystery, and I was turning into a detective to figure it out. I started paying attention, really close attention. I'd sit by my window in the morning, sipping my juice, and watch my yard. I'd check my garden in the afternoon, making sure everything was okay. I even counted how many times I turned on my hose just to be sure it was me using the water. But the bill? It kept growing, like a weed I couldn't pull out. Something was wrong, and I wasn't going to let it slide. My gut, that funny tummy feeling, was telling me to keep looking, so I did. Then one night, something super weird happened. It was dark outside, and the moon was big and round, shining like a giant flashlight. I was inside, getting ready for bed, when I heard a faint little noise. Hiss. It was soft, like a whisper, but it wouldn't stop. Hiss, hiss, hiss. I tilted my head and listened harder. Where was it coming from? It sounded like it was outside, near my house. My heart started beating faster, like drums in my chest. What's that? I mumbled to myself. I couldn't ignore it, I had to find out. So, I grabbed my flashlight, the big one with the bright beam. I slipped on my sneakers, real quiet, and tiptoed to the door. I didn't want anyone to hear me, especially not Karen. I opened the door super slow, so it wouldn't creak, and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the crickets were chirping all around. I flipped on my flashlight and pointed it at the ground, moving the light back and forth. I crept along the side of my house, where the noise was loudest. Hiss, hiss. It was definitely coming from here. I got down on my knees, shining the light under the bushes. That's when I saw it, something small and sneaky. A tiny hose. It was super skinny, like a snake, and it was hooked right into my water line. My water line, the one I used for my garden. I followed it with my flashlight, watching it twist and turn. It sneaked along the ground, under my flowers, and then oh my gosh under the fence. And where did it go? Straight to Karen's yard. My jaw dropped so low it almost hit the dirt. Karen had been stealing my water. I sat there, staring at that hose, my brain spinning like a top. She'd been taking my water for weeks, maybe even months. That's why my bill was so big. Every time I paid for water, some of it was going to her lawn, not mine. I thought about her perfect green grass, how it always looked so amazing. Now I knew why it wasn't magic. It was my water keeping it alive. She'd hooked up this sneaky hose and let it run, sucking up my water like a straw in a juice box. I couldn't believe it. My first thought was to run over and yell. I pictured myself banging on her door, shouting, "Karen, you thief! Give me my water back." I could see her face turning red, her mouth flapping like a fish, trying to explain. Oh, it would have felt so good to let it all out. But then I stopped. I took a big breath and thought, no, Jake. You're smarter than that. Yelling might feel good, but it wouldn't fix this. Karen was sneaky, and I had to be sneakier. I had a better idea, a way to catch her and make her sorry. So, I didn't say a word. I turned off my flashlight and crept back inside, quiet as a mouse. My heart was still pounding, but now I was grinning too. I'd caught her. She didn't know I knew her secret, and that was my power. I sat on my couch, thinking about what I'd seen. That tiny hose, it was like a little spy, telling me everything. Karen had been stealing from me all this time, and I'd been paying for it. No wonder she smirked so much. She thought she was so clever, tricking me like that. The next day, I watched her from my window. She was out there, prancing around her yard like a peacock. Her sprinkler was on, shooting water all over her lawn, making it sparkle in the sun. She turned and waved at the neighbors, loud and proud. "Look at my perfect lawn," she shouted, flipping her hair. "It's the best on the street." The neighbors smiled and nodded, but I just sat there, grinning to myself. Perfect lawn, huh? I thought. That's my water you're bragging about, Karen. She had no idea I was onto her. Not a clue. Every time she turned on that sprinkler, I knew what was happening. That sneaky hose was still there, hidden under the fence, sucking up my water to keep her grass green. She'd strut around, acting like she'd done it all herself, but I knew the truth. She wasn't smart, she was a thief. And every time she bragged, it made me smile bigger. She was digging her own hole, like a kid with a shovel in the sand. And me? I was about to bury her in it. I started keeping track of everything. Every day, I'd peek outside and watch her water that lawn. I'd hear the hiss of that hose at night and know it was still working. I even checked my water meter, the little box by my house that counts how much water I use. The numbers were spinning fast, way faster than they should have been. It was proof. Karen was stealing, and my bill was climbing because of her. I could have called her out right then, but I waited. I wanted to be sure, and I wanted a plan. Days turned into weeks, and I kept my secret. Karen kept prancing, kept bragging, kept watering. She'd walk by my garden and say, "Jake, you use too much water," with that sneaky smirk. I'd nod and say, "Yeah, Karen," acting like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was laughing. Too much water? I thought. You're the one using it all. She thought I was clueless, but I was watching every move. Every smirk, every brag, it was more firewood for the pile in my head. And that pile? It was huge now, ready to catch fire. I started noticing little things too, like how her sprinkler ran even when it rained. One day, the sky was gray, and water was pouring down from the clouds. My garden was happy, drinking up the rain, but Karen? She turned on her sprinkler anyway. I stood by my window, shaking my head. Why would she do that? Her lawn didn't need more water, it was already soaked. Then it hit me, she wasn't thinking. She just let that hose run all the time, stealing from me even when she didn't need it. She was greedy, and I was paying for it. Another time, I saw her talking to Mr. Tom, the old guy across the street. She was pointing at her lawn, saying, "I work so hard to keep it nice." Mr. Tom smiled and said, "Good job, Karen." I almost laughed out loud. Work hard? She didn't work at all. That was my water, my money, making her lawn look good. She was lying to everyone, and they believed her. But not me. I knew the truth, and it made me grin every time she opened her mouth. I could have told the neighbors, but I didn't. I kept it to myself, letting her think she was winning. Every day, I'd watch her prance and brag, and I'd smile bigger. She was so proud of that lawn, but it wasn't hers, it was mine. She'd stolen it, drop by drop, and I was the only one who knew. It was like a game now, and I was playing to win. She thought she was digging a garden, but really, she was digging a hole, a big, deep hole she'd fall right into. So there I was, waiting and watching. Karen kept stealing, and I kept grinning. That tiny hose was my secret weapon, proof she was a sneak. My water bill was climbing, but I didn't care. I had a plan brewing. She had no idea what was coming, and that made it even better. The tension was building, like a balloon getting bigger and bigger. Soon, it was going to pop, and when it did, Karen was in for a big surprise. Hey there, friends. We're at the best part of the story now, the part where everything explodes like fireworks. I'm Jake, the garden guy, and Karen, my sneaky neighbor, was about to get a big surprise. After all her stealing and smirking, I was ready to turn the tables. Get comfy, because this is going to be fun. So, the next morning after I found that sneaky hose, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to yell or stomp over to Karen's house, not yet. I'm smarter than that. I grabbed my phone and called my buddy, Mike. Mike's a plumber. He fixes pipes and water stuff for a job. He's a cool guy with a big toolbox and a big smile. Hey, Mike, I said when he answered, I need your help. Can you come to my house today? He said, sure, Jake. What's up? I told him everything about the hose, the water stealing, and Karen's green lawn. He laughed and said, oh, man, that's wild. I'll be right over. Mike showed up an hour later, his truck rumbling down the street. He hopped out, carrying his tools, and gave me a big wink. Show me the sneaky hose, he said. I took him to the side of my house, where that little hose was still hooked up to my water line. It snaked under the fence, disappearing into Karen's yard. Mike got down on his knees, looked at it, and whistled. Yep, he said, she's been stealing your water for sure. Let's fix this. I grinned and said, shut off my line to her house, Mike. And put a lock on it so she can't turn it back on. He winked again and got to work. Mike grabbed a big wrench and some shiny metal stuff from his toolbox. He twisted and turned things on my water line, making little clanking noises. Then he pulled out a lock, a real one, like the kind you put on a bike. He clicked it onto the pipe, locking it tight so no one could mess with it but me. There, he said, standing up and wiping his hands. She's not getting a drop from you now. I clapped him on the back and said, thanks, Mike. You're the best. He laughed and drove off, leaving me with a big grin. Now, it was time to wait. I went back inside and peeked out my window, watching Karen's house. The sun was high in the sky, and it was a hot afternoon, perfect for her to water that fancy lawn of hers. I sat on my couch, sipping some water, and kept my eyes on her yard. I didn't have to wait long. Around 3 o'clock, I saw her flip on her sprinklers. She stood there, hands on her hips, waiting for the water to start spraying. But guess what? Nothing happened. Not a single drop came out. Her sprinklers just sat there, dry as a bone. Karen's face turned red, bright red, like a tomato. She stormed outside, her shoes stomping on the grass, and yelled, "What's wrong with this stupid thing?" She kicked the sprinkler, then bent down and shook it, like that would fix it. I watched her from my window, trying not to laugh. She looked so mad, her arms flapping around, her voice getting louder. "Why isn't it working?" she shouted. She didn't know it yet, but I'd shut her little game down. My water wasn't flowing to her anymore, and she was about to find out why. That's when I made my move. I grabbed a little photo I'd snapped with my phone, the one I took of her sneaky hose that night with my flashlight. It showed everything, the hose hooked to my line, snaking under the fence, going right to her yard. It was proof, clear as day. I slipped the phone in my pocket, took a deep breath, and strolled outside. I walked over to her yard, Calm as can be, like I was just taking a little walk. My heart was beating fast, but I kept a big smile on my face. This was at the big moment. Karen was still yelling at her sprinkler when I got there. "Having trouble, Karen?" I asked, my voice nice and loud so she couldn't miss it. She spun around, her eyes squinting at me, her face all scrunched up. "What do you want, Jake?" she snapped, crossing her arms. She looked so mad, but I didn't care. I was ready. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held up the photo, right in front of her. "You've been stealing my water," I said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "And guess what? I've got the bills to prove it." Her eyes went wide, super wide, like big round plates. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish out of water. She didn't know what to say. I kept going, holding that photo high. "See this hose?" I said, pointing at the picture. "It's hooked to my water line, and it goes to your yard. You've been using my water to make your lawn green." I turned my head and shouted even louder, "She's been stealing from me, everybody." I wanted the neighbors to hear it all. And they did. Windows started popping open all down the street. Mr. Tom, the old guy across the way, peeked out, his jaw dropping low. Mrs. Linda next door stuck her head out, her eyes big and surprised. Even little Sammy, the kid down the block, ran to his porch to watch. Everyone was looking, and Karen knew it. Her face went from red to white, like all the color drained out. She sputtered, I didn't," but she couldn't finish. The words got stuck in her throat, because she knew I had her caught. I held up my phone again, showing off that photo. "I found this hose last night," I said, keeping my voice strong. "It's been taking my water for weeks, maybe months. That's why my bill's so big, Karen. You've been sneaking it to keep your lawn perfect." She shook her head, fast and shaky. No, that's not true," she yelled, but it sounded weak. Nobody believed her, not with that picture right there. The neighbors whispered to each other, pointing at her, and I could see them nodding. They were on my side now. Karen tried to grab the phone, but I pulled it back quick. "Oh no you don't," I said, stepping away. "I've got more proof to my water bills. They're huge because of you." I turned to the neighbors again, waving my hand. "She's been stealing, and I've been paying for it. Her perfect lawn? It's all a lie." Karen's mouth flapped again, but nothing smart came out. I didn't mean to," she started, but then she stopped. She knew it was over. The truth was out, loud and clear, and she was caught red-handed. I stood there, tall and proud, as the neighbors kept watching. Mr. Tom called out, "Is that true, Karen?" Mrs. Linda shook her head and said, "I can't believe it." Sammy giggled and pointed, yelling, "She's a water thief." Karen's face got redder than ever, and she looked around, trying to find a way out. But there was no escaping this. Everyone saw the photo, everyone heard me, and everyone knew what she'd done. She wasn't the queen of the street anymore, she was the sneak who got busted. I crossed my arms and looked right at her. "What do you have to say, Karen?" I asked, my voice calm but strong. She stammered, I just, but she couldn't finish. She knew she'd lost. That sneaky hose, that big lie, it was all out in the open now. I'd shut off her water, shown the proof, and let the whole street see her for what she was. She wasn't smirking anymore. She wasn't strutting. She was just standing there, caught, with nowhere to hide. The tension was huge, like a giant balloon popping in the air. All those weeks of her stealing, all those smirks and brags, it all crashed down right then. I'd been quiet, watching and waiting, but now it was my turn to shine. The neighbors kept staring, whispering, pointing. Karen's perfect little world was falling apart, and I was the one who made it happen. She thought she could trick me, but I tricked her right back, and it felt so good. So there it was, friends, the big reveal. Karen's secret was out, and she couldn't wiggle away. My photo, my words, my proof, it all hit her like a big wave. She was caught, and the whole street knew it. What do you think, huh? Did I do good? Stick around, because this story's not over yet, there's more fun coming. What do you think, friends? Can you believe she was stealing my water? Stick around, because this story's about to get wild. Hey, friends. We're at the end of this wild ride now, and it's time to wrap things up with a big, happy bow. I'm Jake, the garden guy, and after catching Karen stealing my water, I wasn't done yet. Oh no, I had more up my sleeve. She thought she could sneak away with no trouble, but I made sure justice came knocking on her door. Let's see how it all went down. So, after that big showdown in her yard where I showed everyone that sneaky hose photo, I didn't just sit back and relax. Nope. I had those water bills piling up, and they weren't cheap. We're talking hundreds of dollars, all because Karen was sucking up my water like a big straw. Every month, I'd open those bills and groan. My garden didn't use that much, but my wallet was feeling the pinch. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not a chance. I grabbed all those bills, big stacks of paper with numbers that made my eyes hurt, and called my friend Lisa. Lisa's super smart. She's a lawyer, which means she helps people with rules and laws. I met her at my house one sunny day, and she sat on my couch with a cup of juice. Lisa, I said, handing her the bills, Karen's been stealing my water. Look at this. I showed her the photo of the hose too, and her eyes got big. Oh, Jake, she said, smiling, we've got her. Let's take her to court. Court. That sounded fancy, but Lisa explained it super easy. It's a place where a judge listens, she said. We'll show them your bills and that photo, and they'll make Karen pay you back. I nodded fast. Let's do it, I said. So, we made a plan called a small claims case. That's when you ask a judge to fix something small like money someone owes you. Lisa filled out papers, and I gave her all my proof, the bills, the photo, even a little note about how much water I usually use for my garden. It was all ready. A few weeks later, we went to the courthouse. It was a big building with tall doors and lots of people walking around. I wore my best shirt, the blue one with no holes, and Lisa had a fancy briefcase. We sat in a room with a big chair up front, where the judge would sit. Karen was there too, looking grumpy. Her arms were crossed, and she wouldn't even look at me. I waved anyway, just to be nice, but she turned her head away. She knew she was in trouble. The judge came in, a tall lady with glasses and a black robe, like a superhero costume. She sat down and said, "Okay, let's hear this case." Lisa stood up first. "Hi, Judge," she said, all calm and cool. "My friend Jake's neighbor, Karen, stole his water. She hooked a hose to his line and used it for her lawn. Here's the proof." Lisa held up the photo of the hose, big and clear, so the judge could see. Then she showed the water bills, page after page of big numbers. "Jake paid all this," Lisa said, "but Karen's the one who used it." The judge leaned forward, looking at the photo. She said, nodding slow. "That's a hose, all right. And it's going to her yard." Lisa smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Jake caught her, and he shut it off. But he's out hundreds of dollars." The judge wrote something down, then looked at Karen. "What do you say, Karen?" she asked. Karen stood up, her face all red again. It wasn't a big deal," she whined, her voice all squeaky. "I didn't mean to. It was just a little water." "A little water?" I almost laughed out loud. Lisa jumped in quick. "A little water," she said. "Look at these bills. Hundreds of dollars isn't little. And here's Jake's water meter, it spun like crazy because of her." The judge took the papers and looked close. She flipped through the bills, her glasses shiny under the lights. Karen kept whining, "I didn't know it was that much," but it sounded silly. The judge didn't look happy with her. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my hands a little shaky, and said, "Hi, Judge. I worked hard on my garden, but Karen took my water to make her lawn look good. I paid for it all, and it's not fair." The judge smiled at me just a little and nodded. "I see," she said. "You've got proof, Jake. That photo's clear, and these bills don't lie." Karen huffed and crossed her arms tighter, but I could tell she was nervous. The judge was on my side. After a bit more talking, the judge banged her hammer, bang, and said, "I've made my choice." Everyone got quiet. "Karen," she said, looking right at her, "you stole Jake's water. That's wrong. You have to pay him back every penny." My heart jumped, yes. And The judge added, "You'll pay extra for the trouble you caused. That's called damages." Lisa whispered to me, "That means more money." I grinned so big my cheeks hurt. The judge wrote numbers down and said, "Karen, you owe Jake all the water bill money, hundreds of dollars plus extra. It's thousands now." "Thousands?" My jaw dropped. Karen's face went white, like a ghost. "Thousands," she squeaked. "I can't." But the judge banged her hammer again. "That's my rule," she said. "Pay him, Karen." Lisa high-fived me under the table, and I felt like a superhero. Justice was mine. We left the courthouse, and I was bouncing with happiness. Lisa said, "You did it, Jake. She has to pay you back." I hugged her and said, "Thanks, Lisa. You're the best." A few days later, I got a check in the mail, money from Karen. It was a lot, thousands of dollars, just like the judge said. I ran to my garden and danced around my flowers. "We won, guys," I told my roses and daisies. They didn't answer, but I knew they were happy too. Now, let's talk about Karen's lawn. Oh boy, it's a mess. Without my water, her sprinklers don't work. Her grass turned brown and dusty, like an old rug. No more perfect green, no more bragging. She doesn't strut around anymore either. When she sees me, she turns and walks the other way fast, like I'm a ghost she's scared of. She avoids me like the plague. That's what my mom says when someone runs away from you. I just wave and smile, nice as can be, but she's gone before I can say hi. The neighbors? They're my buddies now. Mr. Tom across the street waves every day. "Hey, Jake," he calls. "You're the water hero." Mrs. Linda next door brings me cookies sometimes and says, "Good job standing up to her." Even little Sammy runs over and says, "You beat the water thief." They all smile at me like I'm some kind of champ. I guess I am. My gardens never looked better, bright flowers, green grass, all watered with my water now. I stand out there with my hose, spraying it around, and grin big. Justice feels so good. Every drop I use now reminds me I won. Karen can't steal from me anymore, her sneaky days are over. Her lawn's a dusty mess, her head's down, and my garden's the star of the street. The neighbors cheer for me, and I cheer for my flowers. It's like a big happy ending, one drop at a time. I got my money back, I got my water back, and best of all, I got my peace back. No more bossy Karen ruining my day. So that's it, friends, justice was served. Karen learned her lesson, and I came out on top. My garden's blooming, my wallet's full, and the street knows I'm the good guy. What do you think? Pretty cool, right? Stick around, because I've got more stories to tell. Hey there, friends. We've made it to the end of this crazy story about me, Jake, and my sneaky neighbor Karen. It's been a wild ride, right? From her stealing my water to me catching her and winning in court, it's like a big adventure. But now, I want to sit back with you and talk about what it all means. Let's take a moment to think about some big ideas, because this story's got a cool lesson inside it. Ready? Here we go. So here's the thing I learned: sometimes, the people who act the toughest, like they're the biggest, strongest, or loudest, are hiding something sneaky. Yep, it's true. Karen was like that. She walked around our street like she was the boss of everything. She'd yell at me about my garden, boss me around about my trash cans, and smirk like she was so much better than me. She acted tough, all big and loud and bossy. But guess what? She wasn't tough at all. She was hiding a dirty trick, stealing my water to make her lawn look good. All that strutting and bragging? It was just a cover-up for her sneaky secret. I didn't see it at first. Karen's tough act fooled me for a while. She'd snap, "Jake, your flowers are ugly," or "Move your cans," and I'd think, "Wow, she's mean." I'd nod and smile, keeping quiet, because I didn't want a fight. But inside, I was getting mad. Her tough words piled up like rocks in my head, and I started wondering why she cared so much about my stuff. Then I found that hose sneaking from my water line to her yard, and bam, it hit me. She wasn't tough. She was sneaky. The loudest bark doesn't always mean the biggest bite, you know? Sometimes it's just noise to hide something bad. But here's the cool part: if you stay sharp and play it smart, you can flip the game right back on them. That's what I did. I didn't yell or run over to Karen's house when I found that hose. Nope, I stayed calm. I watched her, I took my photo, and I made a plan. I called my plumber buddy Mike to lock my water line, and I waited for the perfect moment. When her sprinklers didn't work and she got all mad, I strolled over with my proof and showed everyone the truth. I didn't need to be loud or tough, I just needed to be smart. And it worked. Karen's sneaky trick fell apart, and I came out on top. It's like a game of tag, but with brains instead of running. Karen thought she was winning because she was loud and bossy, but I tagged her back by being quiet and clever. I stayed sharp watching, thinking, planning. I didn't let her tough act scare me away. And when the time was right, I flipped it all around. She had to pay me back thousands of dollars, her lawn turned into a dusty mess, and the neighbors cheered for me instead of her. Being smart beat being loud, and that's a big win in my book. So, what do you think, friends? Did Karen get what she deserved? I want to hear from you. Drop your answer down below, say yes if you think she did, or no if you don't. Tell me why, too. Was it fair that she had to pay me back? Did her sneaky ways catch up with her? I'd love to know what's in your head after the story. For me, I say yes, she deserved it. She took my water, lied about it, and acted like a big bully. But when the truth came out, justice came knocking, and I got to smile big. What about you? And hey, here's one more thing to think about, never underestimate the quiet guy next door. That's me. I'm not loud. I don't strut around or brag like Karen did. I'm just Jake, the guy who loves his garden, waters his flowers, and keeps to himself. People might look at me and think, oh, he's nothing special. Karen sure thought that. She figured I'd never catch her, never fight back. But guess what? I surprised her big time. The quiet guy can be the strongest one when it counts, he just might shock you. That's a cool lesson, right? You don't have to be the loudest or the toughest to win. You can be quiet, you can be nice, and still come out on top. I didn't yell at Karen or start a big fight. I used my head, my eyes, and my heart. I loved my garden so much that I wouldn't let her ruin it. And when I saw her trick, I didn't give up, I got smart. Maybe you're quiet too, or maybe you know someone who is. Don't count them out. They might have a surprise up their sleeve, just like I did. This story makes me think about other stuff too. Like, how sometimes people act big to hide something small. Karen's lawn was her pride, she bragged about it all the time. But it wasn't even hers. It was my water making it green. Without that, her yard turned brown and sad. She wasn't as great as she pretended to be. And me? I didn't need to brag. My garden stayed pretty because I worked hard, not because I stole anything. Real strength isn't about shouting, it's about doing what's right, even when it's quiet. I bet you've seen tough acting people before. Maybe at school, someone's loud and bossy, telling everyone what to do. Or maybe you've got a neighbor like Karen, acting all high and mighty. Next time you see that, think of this story. Are they really tough, or are they hiding something? And if they're picking on you, don't be scared. Stay sharp, watch, listen, think. You can flip it back on them, just like I did. You don't need to be loud to be strong, you just need to be you. Karen's out there now, hiding in her house, while my garden blooms brighter than ever. I water it every day with a big grin, knowing I won fair and square. The neighbors wave, the sun shines, and everything feels right. It's like a happy ending in a movie, but it's real. And it all happened because I didn't let her tough act fool me. I stayed me quiet, smart, and ready to fight the right way. So here's my big thought for you: be brave, be smart, and don't let the loud ones trick you. You've got power inside you, even if you're quiet like me. Maybe you'll catch a sneak someday, or maybe you'll just grow your own garden. Whatever it is, you can do it. Never underestimate yourself, okay? You might surprise everyone, just like I surprised Karen. The quiet ones. We're the ones to watch out for. What do you think, friends? Did this story make you feel strong? Drop your ideas below, I can't wait to read them. Tell me if Karen got what she deserved, or if you've got a quiet hero story of your own. And hey, stick around, there's more fun coming soon. For now, I'm off to water my flowers, smiling all the way. See you next time.